This is a lecture on Ignacio Ellacuría's 1989 essay, The Challenge of the Poor Majority. Some background about this uh, lecture. The lecture was given on November the 6th, 1989. 1989 was a tremendous year. It was the year the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union began to break apart. And there was a lot of turmoil and change and transformation going on in the world. The award for which this lecture was given, an award was given to the UCA, the University of Central America in San Salvador, El Salvador, by the Alfonso Comín Foundation in Barcelona. Comín was a Marxist-inspired Catholic thinker, and Ellacuría saw Comín's work as reflecting or embodying Ellacuría's idea that philosophy should come from the place of the oppressed. The award was given, and Ellacuría was in Spain to give this lecture. He asks or addresses the question: who chose capitalism? And he writes on page 171 of this essay: it has not been human beings, classes or social groups, nations or groups of nations who have decided to put themselves at the service of production and accumulation of capital. Rather, it has been capital, especially internationally, but also within nations, that puts at its own service human beings, social classes, and nations, not to mention the entire workings of the economy, the most decisive part of the social body. Human work, meaning in almost everything human beings do consciously and purposefully to transform reality, is especially subjected to capital's driving force. So Ellacuría begins with this idea that in some respects, important respects, capital has a life of its own. It exerts pressures beyond the individual or group intentions of any uh, uh, individuals or groups, beyond their intentions. Capital seems to have a life of its own that directs individuals, nations, societies to live and behave and to interact with each other in certain structured ways. And nobody had a vote about this. Nobody got together and said, well, let's precisely do it this way. Now, you'll remember, I think, from our discussion of the base superstructure model that we found in Marx, that all societies, inescapably, have to deal with whatever natural resources their part of the world provides them with. And all societies have to determine what to do about those natural resources to turn them, through their labors, into products of use for human beings. And then the question has to be settled about how those end products are distributed. We talked about that. And however those decisions get made, we learned, uh, uh, gives rise to a political and legal system that turns around and supports and justifies and attempts to legitimate those decisions, however they got made. And Ellacuría, I think, has this in mind when he's making this observation here, that certain practices came into being. And once those practices came into being, a superstructure developed that turns around and tries to enforce those practices rather than others, but without everyone's being consulted about that. Now, when he offers a critique of capitalism in this essay, is he saying that capitalism is all bad? He is not. He says we must credit capitalism with certain achievements that are important in human history. For instance, in science and technology, capitalism has given rise to great power of technological prowess and tremendous insights in scientific exploration. Also in politics, capitalism has been largely responsible for the acceptance of the ideas of human rights, basic human rights. Human rights is a relatively modern idea. The idea of rights as we understand them did not exist in the ancient world. Socrates' rights weren't violated when he spoke in the agora in the marketplace and asked his challenging questions. He didn't have any rights, not because he had them and somebody took them away. No one thought in terms of rights. But with the rise of modernity and modern science and technology and capitalism, the idea of human rights took hold. And Ellacuría says that's a good thing. And I think we should recall, as I might have mentioned before, Marx had good things to say about capitalism, as well as his harsh criticisms. He says that it produced the abundance and the technology that would be necessary to free us human beings from drudgery. He praised, for instance, capitalism's idea of the creation of LLCs, limited liability corporations, that many of you in your studies talk about. He says, despite their risks, they unleash productive creativity. It defends the experimenters from personal liability, and that gives them the freedom to try things. And Marx thought, okay, it has risks, but there's a lot of benefits. Uh, and basically, the principles of historical materialism, which again is reflected in that base superstructure model, if there's no capitalism, then there can never be communism. Capitalism means the means of production are held in private hands. Somebody owns the factories, farms, and fields. Communism says the means of production are held in common, not by the state, that's the Soviet Union model, but in common. However, if that's possible, that's the principle, that the means of production are not held by any individual over the access to other individuals. No one has to go hat in hand to somebody else to access the means of being alive, making a living, let alone thriving. So communism, though, cannot, even in principle, take place unless there's abundance. If there's still scarcity, then there is going to be competition, and there's going to be haves and have-nots, and there's going to be class conflict, and there's going to be history, and there's going to be strife. The end of all that comes with communism, but you don't get to the end of that on Marxist theory unless there's abundance. And the greatest engine for producing abundance is capitalism. The critique of capitalism that's being offered here is not saying capitalism is bad, but now it has done its job. And we're starting to see not so much the benefits as much as the pernicious effects, and we need to transition to something else. That's the argument. Whether you buy that argument or not, it's important at least understand what the argument is. So how does this critique of capitalism go? A. Correa says, well, you can't begin with just what he calls idealistic moralizing. You just sit around going, oh, can't we all just get along? Can't be better? No, he's a materialist when it comes to this in a way. He says, we need a compelling materialism. Remember, change our practices and our ideas will change. All right. So he's saying, I'm not in any way strictly opposed to wealth. And wealth is not bad. But in opposition, he says, to the sort of poverty caused by capitalism. He's not complaining that people got wealthy. He's complaining that the system has impoverished great multitudes of people within capitalism, no way out. He says it doesn't mean starting from scratch, but capitalism widens the gap between rich and poor, which destabilizes society. And I just ask you, challenge you to just Google wealth gap. Just take a look at over the past couple of decades, how much wider the gap between the fraction of the 1% have and say the bottom 40 or 50% of all of humanity. How much wider that gap has gone. Just take a look at the headlines about how the billionaires are doing during the COVID pandemic that we're living through at the current moment. That destabilizes things. And I think you look around the world and you see a lot of instability that we're all facing. Capitalism makes exploitation more harsh and more sophisticated, both. It's harsh in the sense that there seems to be no way out, and it's very sophisticated and clever in the ways that it kind of hooks us in and makes us think that it's a drop from the sky necessity, rather than a particular historic set of practices that might be otherwise. Capitalism generates global ecological degradation. It's hard to deny the global climate change and the tremendous negative effects it's going to have on this planet in the coming decades. A real challenge, especially for those of you in the younger generations. You're going to have to cope with this, and capitalism plays a role in that. And going for profit, the concern for the planet was put to the side. Capitalism is responsible, A. Correa says, quote, for the conspicuous dehumanization of those who, pressured by the nervous and harassed productivism of having and amassing wealth, power, honor, and the ever-changing gamut of consumer goods, opt to give up the difficult task of gradually achieving their own being. We get lost in all the doing, in business, busyness. in the things, in the consuming, in the gadgets, in the novelties of what's next and what's new. He's arguing that we lose ourselves. Now, Zubiri, for instance, would say, look, in everything we do, however we do it, we are making our I as agents, actors, and authors. We may be doing it very consciously and with intention, or we may be going with the flow and with the they and what they say would be good. The question, as Zubiri would say, is which I are we achieving? Which I are we making in our choices and actions and the way that we live? A. Korea raises the question of Christianity and capitalism, and he says the following, which may be stunning. Christian faith is irreconcilable with a capitalist civilization. Irreconcilable. You can see, for instance, if you want some additional support for a claim like that, you could see Pope John Paul II, or St. John Paul, his document Laborum Exercens from 1981. A. Korea writes, poverty, quote, is one of the best proofs of what the fruits are that are inherent in capitalist civilization. No matter how much capitalism would like to see itself as a Western Christian civilization and as a model of democratic life, the truth is quite the opposite. Capitalism is not Christian because it lives quite contentedly with and is the cause of many forms of poverty and exploitation of others. We learned in our last lecture that when A. Korea says Christian, he means the preferential option for the poor. He means standing in the place of the poor, the widow, the orphan, the outcast, the stranger, the non-being. That's the place where Christianity is real, where it's true. He continues, capitalism is not democratic because it respects neither the majority will of humankind nor the sovereignty of nations. Again, the vast majority of us do not get asked how we would like things to go. They just go, and we try to hang on for dear life. But then A. Korea quickly says Christian faith is also irreconcilable with the postulates of Marxism. Christian faith is irreconcilable with a capitalist civilization, but he quickly says it's also irreconcilable with the postulates of Marxism, other than the rejection of the private accumulation of capital, the private holding of the means of production, the means necessary for the vast majority of us, for all of us, in fact, to live and to thrive. Other than that economic critique, which A. Korea finds value in, a lot of the rest of what Marxism has to say about who human beings are and what our ends and goals and purposes are, he would disagree with. Now, you could say and should say that A. Korea could be rightly described as a man of the left, politically speaking, but it's not just lefties that have a critique of capitalism. I cite as one example the philosopher David Bentley Hart, who wrote an essay in the journal First Things back in 2016. That's a conservative Christian and quite strongly Catholic in many respects, although it's ecumenical, but a conservative journal, conservatives. And here's what he wrote. Here's just two pull quotes from that essay. Simply said, I have never been able to understand those almost exclusively American souls who expend such energy both on lamenting the late modern collapse of so many of the moral accords and cultural values and religious aspirations of the past, and also on vigorously promoting the very system of material and social practices that made that collapse inevitable. I'm so upset about the decline of the family, the decline of family values, the decline of small communities, the decline of the diversities of expressions, the idea that different places can have a different character. Everything's just become all homogenized. Well, if you read the conservative thinkers of the middle of the last century, I'm thinking right now of Russell Kirk, for instance, who argued that capitalism was no friend of conservatism, that the capitalist drive for profit and for unleashing technology and the pursuit of profits, gives rise to the homogenization and the breakdown of the substantial qualities of what it means to be human or a family or society or community. For instance, Kirk complained about if I'm remembering correctly, the interstate highway system. He didn't think that was a good idea to move goods and services faster and faster all over the place. He thought that was a bad idea because he thought what would happen is everything would become least common denominator. Think about it. There used to be regional music. You go to different parts of the country or different music. Regional food. You go to different parts of the country, there'll be different food. Now it's the same chain stores on every corner and same chain restaurants on every corner, pretty much everywhere you go. Very few places with their own character left. Why is that? That's terrible, conservatives. That's terrible. What caused that? Capitalism caused that. And at the same time, conservatives, at least these days especially, have said that what conservatism is the defense of capitalism, right? So Bentley Hart is calling that out. Bentley Hart, by the way, he's not a Catholic, Roman Catholic. To my understanding, he's an Orthodox Christian, like Eastern Orthodox Christian. He further says the claim that capitalist culture and Christianity are compatible, indeed that they are not ultimately inimical to one another, seems to be not only self-evidently false, but quaintly and perhaps perilously deluded. There's something delusional about, on the one hand, being completely a defender of capitalism, which is impersonal and as godless as any communism you'd ever find. And on the other hand, lamenting what may well have been very important and meaningful values that we could talk about some of those values, and some of them are maybe ones we would want to jettison, I think, if we thought about it. But there was a point of the older school conservatives and some people on the left on their critique of capitalism. It did a great job producing abundance, but now we have abundance, right? No one goes to bed hungry because there's not enough food in the world. No one, zero. People go to bed hungry because of politics and capitalist economics and corrupt statist economics. Let me quickly throw that in there as well. The statist, so-called Marxist economies could be just as brutal to the individual. Then A. Korea starts on a conversation, a very, to me, very interesting conversation that should be much longer, about the relationship between work and leisure. And he says work and leisure are not in opposition to each other. We think that they are. We're always thinking that we're working for the weekend. I mean, even Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics says something to that effect. He says work is important. It's a personal need. In order to be a person, be the person you are, you need work. It contributes to personal development and it contributes to psychological balance. If you don't have anything to do, if you don't have any projects, if you don't have any meaningful work, then you will struggle as a person. I think those of us who have been shut down a little bit during these, and maybe a lot during this pandemic, know exactly what A. Korea is saying here. Work is certainly a social need as well. It's necessary for the production of that which enables human thriving, freeing all to pursue their life prospects. Again, Marx thought that with the advance of technology, we'd have way more time to pursue our own individual, unique, creative projects. Instead, we're all on the clock all the time. A. Korea says, work is about the real drive towards the perfection of persons and the humanizing and enhancement of the living environment in which we are a part. That's what work is for. So work then is not primarily meant to result in capital accumulation, pulling that wealth of all that creative productivity out of the system and into the pockets of a few. Work is meant to fill leisure. Capitalist work is the negation of leisure. It's the 24/7, 365. The lights are always on. Wow, I have a small interest in astronomy, and it happens to be October when I'm recording this, and there's clear skies and great meteor showers going on. I can't see any of it because all the lights are on. Not just the lights for the parking in my community, but just, Philadelphia is just right over the hill there, and it's a great beacon in the sky. There's so much light pollution, I can't see any of that. Why? Because we're busy. I would recommend to you Josef Pieper's book, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. It's a wonderful book You'd be very interesting to learn that without a certain kind of leisure, we would never have the beautiful things of human creativity that form the core of culture. And I also want to remind you that our very word school that we're all in right now comes from the Greek skole, which actually means leisure. So we'd have to ask, is the term schoolwork even an oxymoron, like jumbo shrimp? Are they really opposites? Well, they're not. They're not if you understand work as something that's meant as the process by which human beings become humanized, become persons, become the best we can be. And you've probably heard that phrase, find something you love to do and you'll never work a day in your life. You heard that? Find something you love to do, you never work a day in your life, 'cause it doesn't feel like work. It doesn't feel like that treadmill that we're on just to be on, just to make enough money to keep living and coming back the next day. That's a different kind of work. That's capitalist work. Now, I wanted to leave you with a quote from an essay by Bob Black, an anarchist, called the Abolition of Work. And he says, no one should ever work. Work is the source of nearly all the misery in the world. Almost any evil you'd care to name comes from working or from living in a world designed for work. In order to stop suffering, we have to stop working. Now, the only way that makes sense is to recognize that Bob Black is thinking of what Aya Korea is calling capitalist work. Not a natural human labor, but work for profit, and generally not your own profit. So Aya Korea wants to distinguish between a civilization of capital and a civilization of work, a work in the good sense, a work that even Bob Black, I think, would get behind. I mean, he writes essays, that's work, in the good sense. Replacing the civilization of capital with the civilization of work does not mean getting rid of capital, because you can't, but only of its primacy. Replace the primacy of capital and capital accumulation and profit with the primacy of labor, of working. I used to work for a big corporation. I won't name names. And I worked on the strategic planning committee of that. And it was shocking and surprising that I was invited to be a part of that effort, because I sometimes see things a little differently than other people. And the company, like all corporations, was worried about its profitability. And generally, when it comes to that question, the first thing that corporations think about is their payroll. How can I reduce payroll? How can I make the most profit with the fewest number of people possible? And I asked one day, and I'm surprised I didn't get kicked right off the committee for even asking it. I asked it probably rhetorically, not thinking that there'd be an answer. I said, well, why does that have to be the measure? Why is the measure how much money can we make with the fewest number of people? Why couldn't it be how much money could we make employing the highest number of people? Like, let's see how we can just hire more and more and more, get more and more people paid, more and more people paid well, and make money. Why don't we look at it that way? Why don't we look at it a way for the people here to work on something that's interesting and important and valuable to their fellow citizens, and get as many people as possible getting involved with that? I don't know. But anyway, that's the way I looked at it. That would be a primacy of labor point of view. I thought that before I read any of this stuff. The change from civilization of capital to civilization of work would require a consciousness of the need for change, an awareness, what Aya Korea would say is the realizing the weight of reality, seeing what's going on, that noetic element of our confrontation of what's really happening with real reality. It would also require economic, political, and social models to enable the change. We can't just sit around saying, well, it'd be nice to change, because the first question would be to what? It's one of the principles of a kind of a postmodern world we live in, that novelty seems to be the number one criterion. We want something new. Well, why necessarily is new good? Like, if I find some new growth on my skin, I don't think to myself, hey, that's new, great. No, it's new. I don't want it. What I'm interested in is good rather than bad, better rather than worse. right? And to be able to do that, I have to have some understanding of what would be better rather than worse. So I'm going to need some models. That's why there's such an insistence on social science in Aya Korea. Both a critical tearing down is required and a constructive building up. You can't just tear down and think that's going to be sufficient. You can't just break everything apart or defund everything and say, oh, well, that'll fix everything. Nope, sorry, you have to be ready for the constructive or building up part. That's parallel to what Aya Kriya says about the function of philosophy. There's the critical part and the creative part. Well, here we are again. Aya Kriya sees constructive criticism at this time, the time he was writing in 1989, in socialist states, but not in capitalist states. He saw that there was more interesting, engaging thinking about how we might do better in socialist states. So he's very critical, and he had reason to be. The United States, in particular, was an enemy of absolutely every effort at social justice in El Salvador in Aya Kriya's lifetime. Why wouldn't he think that? He thought, Aya Kriya did, that 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall and the breaking up of the Soviet Union, was misunderstood and described in very ideological terms. The ideological terms at the time was that shows you communism is dead, capitalism is all that there is. Neoliberalism is the complete solution. It is the natural way for human beings to be. It is dropped from the heaven. Everything else is an error. I'm not sure that's right myself, but Aya Kriya was fairly sure that that was not correct. That was not what was happening with the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was not saying that a socialist ideal was no good. It was saying that what was riding under the banner of a socialist ideal was no good and not working and had to go. And certainly it did. Nobody would want to trade places with that. Now he brings this question around to the UCA, the University of Central America, Jose Simeon Cañas in San Salvador. He says, El Salvador, the nation, is a place where the universal historical crisis of the times is most manifest. It was a very poor country under the boot heel of the richest and most powerful nation on earth at the time, the United States. He writes, in this situation, the civilization of capital and empire has been manifesting some of its gravest evils. The U.S. spent at that time at least $3 billion to disrupt efforts at social change, including funding, state terrorism. There's no way of getting around that. The UCA plays an active role, he says, in this struggle, but he tries to play that role, and it ought, he argues, as we'll see in the next essays, it ought to play its role as a university. The university is not a political party. It's not a paramilitary organization. It's a university where there's scholarship and there's research and there's teaching and there's the dissemination of learning. That's what it is. And it ought to play its role in the struggle for justice as what it is, not as something else. Ought not to become something else. But it's not just about training professionals. Training professionals, you will see in the next essay, Aya Kriya says is very important, but it's not the main purpose of a university. And we could ask, what's the main purpose of our own university? I think we should ask that question. The UCA contribution to the struggle is to create a body of thought, models, and proposals for negotiations. What are the alternatives? What else might we try? What else might be better? He says that the UCA must be honest and objective in this struggle. It must be free and independent in this struggle. And the UCA requires a great deal of courage in a country where the weapons of death are fired too often and in a very threatening proximity. Remember, this is a speech given in Spain, November 6th, 1989. 10 days later, upon his return to El Salvador, Aya Kriya was murdered by US-backed forces, along with his fellow Jesuits and his housekeeper and her daughter. He says the UCA must not be impartial. It should be objective, right? But objectivity and freedom may demand taking sides. Objectively, some side could be being unjust, and that has to be addressed, he argues. Preferential option 4, which means choosing solidarity with and a commitment to the poor. That's taking the side of the poor. That is the Christian character of the Uka, the same as whatever Christian character there might be of philosophy. It doesn't change what philosophy is, it puts it in a certain place. It doesn't change what the university is, it puts it in a certain place. What place? The place of the oppressed, the place of what he called in an earlier essay, the crucified masses. He writes, "This is how our university works in a revolutionary fashion for the cause of liberation in El Salvador. In a university manner, we want to accompany a process led primarily by the masses, although perhaps in a partial and imperfect way. And we wish to do so out of a Christian inspiration, which regards a preferential option for the historic cause of the poor as obligatory." Right? So he doesn't think the university will solve the nation's problems all by itself, just like he didn't think philosophy would solve the problem of liberation all by itself. It plays a role. It has to understand its role, and it has to play it well. Now, just to finish up this essay, I want to bring in a thinker that I've mentioned in previous lectures to talk about this idea of taking sides, of being partial to one side versus another. So I'm referencing now the philosopher John D. Caputo. He wrote a book called Against Ethics, which is a provocative title. He doesn't mean against being good. He means it's against some of the ways we try to answer the question, how is it best for us to be? In fact, many of the traditional ways he thinks fail to answer the question adequately, how is it best for us to be? Kant tried, Mill tried, and Aristotle tried. Caputo says, well, they may be going about it the wrong way. Anyway, I want to read this passage. It'll be a little bit opaque to you, but I'll try to explain it a little bit and then finish up with this. He says, the other, who does he mean by the other? The other who is the one who doesn't count, the one who's not benefiting, the one who's repressed or oppressed, the one that's ignored, the one that's invisible to the way the world is going, the other. The other who claims us ethically in obligation is not an infinity surpassing totality, which is a view by a thinker, Emmanuel Levinas, but a part that defies the totality, that resists totalization, that asserts itself hyperbolically in the face of a faceless cosmos. The other is not an infinity, but a partiality to which we are unapologetically partial. All right, Emmanuel Levinas is a French Jewish thinker, 1906 to 1995. For him, the idea of the other was something that came to each one of us from on high, almost, as the holy. The other was holy and not on our level, but above us, that makes demands upon us. And Levinas says you encounter this holy other in the face, especially the face of the suffering other, that just makes a demand on you beyond any principles or rules or calculations. Caputo thought that view had some merit to it, but it was too mystical or dependent on maybe theological ideas that you wouldn't necessarily, not everybody would buy into. What Caputo says is the other is more of an infinite partiality, a part of what's going on in defiance of a generally heartless cosmos in the face of nihilism. Caputo likes to make this idea that he gets out of Nietzsche central to his thinking. You look up in the sky at night. I said I have an interest in astronomy. You look up and there's a cosmos that's 13.8 billion years old, and it's in the midst of cosmic evolution, including our planet. And hey, guess what? At a certain point, not this weekend, but at a certain point, our sun will run out of fuel, supernova, it'll incinerate the planet, and it will be like we were never here. And the cosmos does not care. It does not, earthquakes do not care about us. Fires don't care about us. Hurricanes and tornadoes don't care about us. The universe has no care what we do. Doesn't matter. We can yell and cry for justice, and the cosmos, as Caputo writes, takes yawns and takes another spin. It just doesn't care. So where does caring come from? Because we care anyway. In the face of that faceless, uncaring cosmos, love happens, care happens, and it happens to us when something snaps us out of our our sleepwalking ways that we generally go through life and probably have to go through life in that way a lot of times. It snaps us out of it, and we find ourselves beyond explanation uh, caring, and we care. And so Caputo, just to finish up this thought, draws us a picture. If you picture this circle, that's what Levinas and Caputo are talking about when they say the totality. You hear that word, what's it mean? It means my world, where everything fits and kind of makes sense, and I know where everything belongs, and I know what matters, and I know what doesn't, and I know what's real. And because so many things may very well be invisible to me, I have a sense of what isn't real. It's my project. It's my understanding, what Heidegger calls world, a referential system of significance or meaning, where everything is what it is with reference to everything else, and certain things don't fit. Just every once in a while, something disrupts us. You can't put it on your day planner. You can't make it one of your own projects. It just something comes in, like a suffering other that just gets in your path, that cries out, "Help me." You don't know, you didn't plan that was going to happen, and you're like, "Hey, I'm late for a meeting," and somebody's saying help, and it just grabs you, maybe, but you feel the pull of this obligation, and for no good reason, because good reason comes from your totality. The good reason is your totality telling you what makes sense and what's reasonable. But for no good reason, something breaks in. Caputo calls it a disaster. Literally, somebody that's without their guiding star, asteroid, astro, star, right? without their guiding star. Somebody needs help. And it breaks up and it deconstructs my world, my totality, my sense of meaning. And he says, a lot of times in ethics, we say, we should be impartial. And you studied theories like coming out of Plato, or Kant is a really good example, who says, you got to be impartial. The categorical imperative demands that we never lie, no matter what, no matter who we're talking about, no matter who gets hurt, really doesn't matter. Lying is wrong for everybody. Absolutely, the end. Completely impartial. And we like that idea. We want, for instance, our judges to be impartial. You go down to a court, you'll see a statue of justice, and justice is holding a balance scale, and you put the weight of evidence on the one side of the case, the weight of the evidence on the other side of the case, and justice is blindfolded in this statue. It's not looking at who's putting the evidence up, it's just weighing the evidence impartially and trying to get justice. So we think that those are really good words. And Caputo says, yeah, I get that. I understand that. But if you want a perfect example of complete and utter impartiality, he says, try the cosmos for reasons we were just talking about. Impartially, the cosmos will kill everything in the end. Not this weekend. Don't panic. Right? In the end. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, white or black or male or female or gay or straight, or it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter where you live, what language you speak, it doesn't matter. In the end, nature will bulldoze us all over, right? That's impartial. It's cold. It's heartless. And what Caputo is talking about, heart. He's talking about courage. That word cœur is in French, heart. Courage means to have heart, take heart, to care, even when there's no reason to care, without a reason to care. And something we're going to learn from Aya Kriya as we go along here, and we already talked about this a little bit, the preferential option for the poor. Why should we have it? Really, what argument could you give to somebody who does not prefer the poor, does not think about the poor, does not care? Say, look at those people suffering. They go, don't care. I don't care. It's not me. I don't care. What argument could you give? Could you say, well, what if it were happening to you? Well, it's not happening to me, so I don't care. It's not I don't know. You don't know what could happen. All you could do is just try to paint a picture, tell a story, not give a philosophical argument, but paint a picture wherein maybe something will break through to that nice, neat, uncaring, heartless, impartial, objective, just going by the rules approach to the world. Something might break it in, and somebody might have a heart. The heart might start beating. That stony heart could be turned into a fleshly heart. That's what Caputo is talking about by being partial to somebody. caring, to have a heart. That's an old way of talking. I'll ask an old person what kind of ice cream they like. They go, "Well, I'm kind of partial to vanilla." Just means I like it. I care about that. There's no argument for why that's better. That's what I care about. And I think Ayakriya and the Uka and the efforts of liberation theology are trying to get us to have fleshly hearts, hearts that beat, hearts that care, in an effort to liberate us from the death of not caring.